Jesus probably wasn't born on December 25th. In fact, he probably wasn't born in December at all. The Bible mentions shepherds keeping watch over their flocks in the fields. December in Israel would have been cold, the fields would have been unproductive, and the sheep were probably quarreled. Shepherds usually kept their flocks in the fields during the spring lambing season. So how did Christmas come to be associated with December 25? The earliest recorded estimates dating the birth of Christ come from Clement of Alexandria, circa AD 200. He mentioned different groups who identified the date of Jesus' birth as March 21, April 15, April 21, or May 20. The first mention of December 25 as Jesus' birthday wasn't until the mid-4th century, when a Roman almanac listed December 25 as Natus Christus in Bethlehem, Judea, or Christ was born in Bethlehem of Judea. We've all heard the story about there being no room at the inn. Indeed, this is what our English Bibles say. But in the original Greek, the language in which the New Testament was written, the word kataluma, translated as inn, doesn't necessarily mean a motel. It's only used a few times in the Bible, and elsewhere, it means upper room or guest room. The famous Last Supper took place in a kataluma. In fact, there's a different Greek word for inn that does mean a motel or paid lodging, but it isn't used, though the same gospel writer uses it in the story of the Good Samaritan a few chapters later. There's no mention of a stable in the Bible's stories of the first Christmas. A stable is assumed because we are told that they laid him in a manger. A manger is an animal's feeding trough. If there was a manger, it must have been in a stable, or perhaps a cave, where the animals stayed, right? Probably not. Since the guest room was full, Mary and Joseph were likely offered the manger, and it was there that the mother of Jesus gave birth. Rather than being turned away by a crusty old innkeeper and given lodging in a dirty barn, Mary and Joseph were probably in a relative's home, surrounded by loved ones, when Jesus was born and laid in a manger. Mary didn't give birth the night she arrived. In our Western reading of the Christmas story, we get the impression that Mary and Joseph made it to Bethlehem just in a nick of time, and that Mary gave birth that very night. The truth is probably far less dramatic. The actual account of the first Christmas reads, "And it came to pass that when they were there, her days were accomplished, that she should be delivered. And she brought forth her firstborn son." The phrase that her days were accomplished is linked to when they were there. This implies that they had been there for a period of time before she gave birth. 6. The wise men didn't arrive the night Jesus was born. The three wise men are a staple in almost every nativity scene, each carrying a gift for the newborn king. Standing beside the shepherds, Mary, Joseph, and baby Jesus, they complete the story of the first Christmas. Or do they? It's also worth noting that after the wise men deceived King Herod by returning a different way, he had all of the children in the vicinity who were 2 years old and younger slaughtered. These facts point to Jesus being a toddler and the wise men having visited him 1 or 2 years after his birth. Five. The shepherds didn't follow the star. How would the shepherds found a newborn baby in a town the size of Bethlehem? The answer is surprisingly simple. Much like today, births in the 1st century were a big deal. If Mary gave birth in the home of one of Joseph's relatives, surrounded by family, the house would have been filled with much rejoicing. The shepherds were no doubt guided by the infant's cries and happy sounds of celebration. For there weren't 3 wise men. We've come to know them as Gaspar, Melchior, and Balthasar, the 3 wise men from the east who supposedly traveled by camel following the star. But were there really only 3 of them? In truth, these 3 names weren't added to the story until the 7th century in the earliest Latin records. 3 gifts are mentioned in the Christmas story: gold, frankincense, and myrrh. Nowhere is the number of wise men recorded. It's assumed that each wise man brought a gift, and thus, there must have been 3 wise men. In reality, there may have been more who came to worship a baby. Early Christian art is inconsistent as to the number of wise men. A painting in the cemetery of Saints Peter and Marcellinus displays 2 wise men, while one in the cemetery of Domitilla shows 4. A vase in the Kircher Museum has 8 wise men. An Asian tradition says there were 12. The truth is that the number of wise men who visited the infant king simply isn't known, and there is no compelling reason, aside from the number of gifts, to believe that there were 3. The wise men weren't kings. We 3 Kings of Orient is sung each Christmas to celebrate the journey of the wise men. Were there really kings? The Greek word used in Matthew 2:1 is magos. The word is primarily used to denote a member of a group of priests or wise men among the Medes, Persians, and Babylonians. They were educated men whose study included astronomy, astrology, and enchantment. It is sometimes translated as wise man, sometimes as magician. The Greek translation of the Old Testament uses the same word in the book of Daniel, where it describes that Daniel was made the chief of the magicians. This fits well with the Christmas story, where we are told that the wise men saw his star in the east and came to worship a baby. Magi studied the stars and saw meaning in the celestial object that dominated the night sky at that time. Rather than being kings, it seems more likely that the wise men were educated astronomers from the east. Mary and Joseph were married when Jesus was born. Part of the scandal surrounding the birth of Jesus was undoubtedly the claim of Mary's immaculate conception. It was this that even led Joseph to initially decide to quietly divorce her rather than have her stoned to death for adultery as the law said. Here was an unwed mother, pregnant in a first-century religious community. However, it's not quite as cut and dry as that. Joseph and Mary were betrothed, or engaged, when they find out that Mary was pregnant. It's likely that they had signed a Jewish engagement contract called a ketubah. This was much more legally binding than our modern engagements and could only be broken by a divorce. There are a number of fascinating features about the star that guided the wise men. It is said to have risen in the east, to have appeared at a specific time, to have gone before them, and to have stopped over Bethlehem. Taken together, these characteristics cannot possibly describe a star, but they do describe planets, known as wandering stars to the ancients. They rise in the eastern sky, travel through the fixed field of stars, and are governed by the planetary law.